Hello. Hi, everybody. Hi,
Hi, good morning.
Leah, Cameron,
Morning.
Circo, Lakey, and Christopher.
Right?
Hello.
Hey, all right, great. So sorry I'm a little bit late. I'm just trying to get my documents all together so we can look at them together. Uh, this is one. Let's see here. Okay, yeah, here we go. So I hope you've had a chance to look over the two. This week is just two documents, two texts. One is from the science point of view, and the other is from more of a philosophical point of view. Uh, the one from science says by that botanist, the biologist named Mauset, and just some inserts from that. And then the others from Kocha, this guy Kocha. So just to give a little preamble, I mean, this week it's about, with this week we begin to think about taking different approaches to infrastructures. Last week's about giving people a chance to say, to speak up and take a stand on some values that are important to you, or at least important to communities in which you have a stake. That's how I put it. And also other values, norms that maybe feel like could be better to let go of and others to recuperate. You know, maybe we can bring them in, and not just this week, but in the subsequent part of the course. All right, that's what that was about. But with this week, what we're doing is beginning to take some different perspectives. Like this week, it's more from what I'm calling metabolic, I mean, kind of biological from the point of view of living systems. Um, and then we'll take other points of view too. All right. So that's for the next few weeks. Like from the point of view of thermodynamics, that's another aspect, another way to look at things. And they're all different. I mean, they're not like one subsumes the other. They're just different optics that we can use to look at situations. And then the second half of the course will be about looking at some case studies, some types of infrastructures. And like I said before, hopefully by the end of that, we'll be able to just convene all these different ways of assessing and these different case studies and bring it back to a common object. All right, like a issue. Any questions on that general arc? Okay. So today, metabolic. So maybe we just get right into it. I mean, you know, why not animals? Well, I'll just say right away. I mean, uh, we can talk about living system, meaning animals first, but there's a lot of that. There's a lot of animal studies, and we're very familiar with animals, either as pets or food or something like that. Um, and of course, we use plants too, but plants are a little bit are a lot further away from the human experience. So I thought, and there's now a movement for the last 10, 15 years, people trying to think about drawing some lessons and insights from biology, but not just reaching for the examples close to hand, meaning animals that we have a domesticated relationship with, or animals we can just anthropomorphize. It's easier to anthropomorphize an animal, a mammal certainly, than a sunflower, let's say. Um, so maybe that's the starting point. And I was wondering if uh, maybe we can start with the scientific part and see if there's some striking ways that plants live in the world that you might want to bring up now. That's your attention. I'll open up the convenience. Hi, Tanya. For convenience, I'm going to open up the mouse set doc just to refresh our memories. Here we are. So the first part of the mouse doc just is more general. It's like scientific ways the scientists can think in a manner that's more thoughtful and wise. This is a standard text for plant biology that people use. It's a really great book. Actually, it's chock full of fascinating stuff about plants. And then the second part of that is all about kind of, focused introduction to particular aspects of plant life. I'll put this in the chat as well. So chat here.
And I apologize for being late, but could you maybe repeat for me the question that you're talking about right now?
What are some aspects or features of plant biology that really struck you being different, remarkable about plants?
Okay, thank you.
Say one thing. Maybe it didn't, I don't know if it struck me, but I had been wondering for a while about like cancerous growths or like overgrowth on plants. And so I found that interesting to read about. And also to think about how like in plants, the like extra growth never like threatens the whole organism because it's really localized. So I thought that was an interesting little bit of information. And also because every time I hike and see like weird growths on plants, I'm like, what is that?
Yeah. Like, is there something wrong with that, or is it just normal? Like trees,
Right.
these large, I don't know what you call them, bunions or something, these large lumps on trees. And didn't
Oh, like burls.
burrows, thank you, burrows, yeah. I mean, and didn't, in the mouse book, didn't they say that plants typically just keep on growing?
I questioned that when I read a part of that. I mean, that is sometimes true, but I don't know if that's an aspect of all plants, right? Like plants have a lifespan. Some, you know, I don't know. It just that struck me as maybe like and I don't know that I finished this. Like I'm a little bit behind on the reading, so I may have just skimmed that particular reading and spent more time in the other one at this point.
Yeah, I'm looking.
But I questioned it as soon as I read it. I was like, wait a minute. Something felt like it's like maybe true, but not always, right?
Yeah. Or maybe it's like, in what sense, right? In what sense
Yeah.
to do this, right? I'm trying to interpret it. I mean, God struck me too. That's why I'm mentioning it. And I'm also talking about, later about cancer, right? So there are differences, I think. I mean, that's what comes up in the parts of the book talk about cell biology and the cell physiology of plants. I'm looking for it here. I'm looking for this here. And certainly true, there are cycles in plants. Like here, they're talking about plants that go quiescent during winter times and things like that. But I think it's more to do with something like for complex animals like mammals and reptiles. There's a kind of adult size.
Right.
So just like, whoop, it gets up to adult size and we stop. And then and it may be the plants just can keep putting out shoots in that sense of growth.
Right. There are, and this is something I've read a lot about trees too. And trees do have different species of trees have, they reach a maximum height and they stop there and they do continue living, but not, and some of it maybe they're growing, but it's very slowed down.
It was just kind of a max height, something like that.
So
I think growth has to be understood in some way. I mean, maybe it's more when we look more finely at the, like the kind of like, branch by branch or tendril by tendril, cell by cell. There's something there that's different about how plants grow. And maybe it's related to the cancer thing too. I mean, I'm just wondering, I think in this section here, when it talks about cancerous growth, and zoom it up a little bit. Yeah, something like this part about the difference between cancer and controlled growth. It's a matter of uncontrolled growth, and the cancerous tissues just grow and it's kind of becomes a homogeneous mass. And then I think that's what somebody was saying, Leo was saying about, or you were saying about burrows, right, in trees. It doesn't seem to be a problem, for plants. You can have this kind of growth of the massive tissue that can happen.
Is that related? I mean, it reminds me of what Leah said about, you know, and they talk about it here where, you know, you can damage one part of the plant, it continues to grow. It doesn't have this sense of every bit being necessary. And that reminds me of kind of, it functions in a lot of ways as a collective of cells. And we can think of it that way more than we maybe think of like a human body as a collective of cells.
Yeah, yeah, and these things, what you're pointing to, what you all pointed to, are some of the reasons why I wanted to start with metabolic perspective before we go back to infrastructure. Because as you're reading these pieces, yeah, it's about plants, but I'm really interested in seeing, in thinking as we read about plant biology, how different it is from social technical systems that we build, like email or even the banking system or whatever. Well, different or same. I mean, different or similar. In other words, are some of these features of plants maybe they're different from how we build social technical systems today, and it would be cool if they did have some of those features, or maybe they are features that kind of resemble some of the aspects of infrastructure. Like this, I just highlighted this part talking about cancer here. I mean, in the middle of that paragraph where he talks about cancer, I mean, he's a plant biologist. So he's saying, well, one reason why it may be that those kinds of growths don't bother the plant as much is because they don't spread, they don't metastasize. I can never pronounce that word. With cancerous tumors, because cells don't migrate through the plant body the way that cells can migrate in our system, lymphatic system or the blood system. Right? So okay, so think about that. I mean, you know, that's one thing. Another thing that's really cool is, does anybody remember the part about leaves? Talk about leaves. You know, leaves are organs actually. Flowers are organs. And somewhere, okay, let's see, where does this find it? I'm talk about organs somewhere in a different section. No, not that one. Yeah. This is still the earlier part, so. Too many organs. There's a part where he talks about, oh, you know what? It's leaves. Yeah, we'll find it. There are fewer leaves. Oh, well. There's a part where he talks about how different it is that plants have all these organs like leaves and whatever, pine cones and pine trees, and they form and drop them. They can let go of them. That an organ for a plant, like a leaf, isn't as mission critical as an organ for me, or what we call organs. You know, I have one of each and two of kidneys, but one of heart, one liver, etc. And that's life-threatening if I lose one. So they have a very different attitude or different use of organs. Something to think about. Okay, they invest a lot less, but they make a lot more of them. And in fact, the very growth and what do you call them, the loss of quote organs in plants is part of the life cycle. I think about fruit, by the way, you know, fruit. So, you know, this is just high school biology. So what do fruits do for plants and for others? Just in ordinary words, what's the fruit for?
To move their seeds around.
And then the yummy stuff, what's that for? What are two purposes? I mean, it could be two purposes.
It's attractive to the other beings around them. So
And
they
then-
move those seeds around.
Yeah. I don't know enough to say for particular plants, how much of the fruit is necessary for, like the starter kit for the seed,
Right.
but maybe a lot less than in an egg. In an egg, yeah, a lot of it's all for that purpose, as far as I can tell. But for fruits, like you're saying, a lot of it's for, to compensate the bird or the insect to transport, right? And this is co-evolved. What's really interesting about biology, which you'll read more about at some point, I hope, is that these kinds of adaptive and let's say niches or traits, features, co-evolve with the organisms. So that kind of the cartoon version of Darwin isn't really the case. What cartoon version would be like, you have a niche just out there, like some transcendental niche, and then a priori niche, I mean, and then you have some creatures that evolve over generations to adapt to that available niche. But what's interesting are these examples where niches and organisms kind of co-evolve, they co-articulate each other, over time, and that's really fascinating. So that's kind of the latest way of thinking in terms of evolutionary biology, thinking about how you kind of enabling constraints, niches, evolve at the same time as the creatures that evolve to take advantage of niches. And niches are enabled by the creatures too. So fruit, there's something else. What else? What else is really different about plants? And this can be from the other book too, from the other thing, which is culture. It talks a lot about it. Go through to the culture model. I'll put the link to the culture. It's really beautifully written. Let me take a look here. Put it in chat. Okay, that should be it. Go through, see if we find. Why go ahead.
Well, how do you pronounce the name? Coach?
Culture, Italian.
Cocha.
Yeah.
Something Cocha mentioned that I wasn't quite in agreement with, or seemed kind of suspect, was that they're comparing plants to animals, and that I think it was on the second chapter, is like plants alone break the topological rule of self-inclusion. They have no need for the mediation of other beings in order to survive, which does not seem like that's the case at all.
What does that mean?
Which part?
Self-inclusion. This thing about break this rule first. What do you think it means? Yeah. In other words, how would we interpret to make sense of this? I'm not sure what he means by topological, first of all. Okay, but I think before that point, he started talking about how plants are how do you call that? Self-nourishing in a way that animals aren't. Maybe it's before this point.
Yeah, he talks a lot about that, but I broke to Cameron right there at that. I wrote that actual thing down as well. This no need for mediation of other beings to survive. It just seems not true.
Well, maybe we can just think about how it is, in what sense it's true.
It's true in the sense that they have structures in their organism to produce their own energy through photosynthesis, right?
I mean, we just talked about how plants need, insects or other creatures to propagate themselves anyway. So that seems to me like a dependence on other beings in order to survive, right? So, so clearly, if you're talking about generations of flowering plants, then they do need seems to me they do need other beings to that. I think what's helpful is when we're reading this kind of stuff, is to say, okay, so in what sense does this author mean it, right? I mean, he's not, he's thoughtful, so he's thinking, he's not just doing things kind of random words. So there must be some sense in which he's intending this. So in what sense does he intend this? So maybe not in the sense of propagating of the species for flowering. So what about, what would this mean? Survive. In other words, what does survive mean in this case? What do you think?
Oh, the self-inclusion is the cannibalism thing that he's referring to. That it is right. In the previous paragraph, it's like there's a sort of parasitism, a universal cannibalism that belongs to the domain of the living. It feeds on itself.
Uh-huh. Then just before it says life seems to have to be its own environment. So I have to go backward and say, well, what does that mean? So this is, because I think the part was more clear to me is not that part, it's maybe earlier, because then it's like, oh wow, maybe that's just a bit sloppy. But before that point, it talks about how plants are really interesting in that they're the only, well, I shouldn't say only, they're the kinds of living things that actually convert light, right? Light, water, rock to living tissue. And that's the beginning, right? I think that's before, isn't that before this part?
It is. Yeah, he does. Yes.
Okay, all right.
In the first chapter, he says that.
Yeah, and that's where, also this is I think he's a poetic writer. He's not a mathematician. He's not a biologist. He's a poetic. To me, he reads like a poetic writer, right? He's a very, so it's actually fun to read, I think. But because it's poetic, I just say, okay, what does it mean? What does it mean? It's not the denotative content of the words. But early on, he does make a nice point, I think. There's several basic things. One is that they can convert non-living matter into living matter. Unlike animals. But I'm vegetarian and carnivores. I had to eat something living, basically, to live. I can't photosynthesize. That's, I think, the profound point. That's the profound point. And all this poetic talk about being a membrane in the world, and maybe even this question about what is it called? Self-containment or something like that. I think he's riffing off the earlier point. Metabolic point. What else would you say? I think it's in the first part too, is really different about plant life. Sorry. This thing about not self. This thing about converting from inorganic to living matter. Do we have any infrastructures to do that? What's your technical systems? I'm trying to think right now.
Specifically non-living to living, or from it kind of
non-living to living. Non-living to living, no. But what about
like in a more metaphorical sense?
Like what?
Depending on definitions of artificial intelligence, you could say that there's some type of like conversion factor, perhaps. But
well, let's hang on to that.
That's
that's something to talk about, right? Is it or is it not? Is it converting non-living material? But even if we allow a kind of a looser notion of living, Okay, let's go with this a little bit. What if we talk about LLMs, like large language models? What's the stuff we're talking about there in that case, if it's LLMs?
What do you mean specifically?
See, with plants, and animals, it's like, it's like, sugars in human body is the chemical version of energy. And plants is whatever the equivalent for that. Plants also have sugars too.
Yeah.
So they convert light and water through the ADP mechanism into into sugars to metabolic processes, which then can convert it into energy to ATP, blah 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 blah. Okay, but that's where the stuff is, energy or sugar. What about in case of large language models? What would stand in, the analog to that?
I guess it would be like silicon and cobalt and electricity, right? And then that is used to fuel this system that feeds words.
Okay. let's go further into this. All right.
Well-
No, but go ahead.
No. Well, the LLMs are a weird thing because it's the input is technically text, and the cobalt and the silicon, etc., is like the substrate in which the text is processed.
Fair. Okay. Yeah.
I was going to say that. Thank you. Right. That's kind of the mechanism, the instrument, but the transformation. When I say medium, it's something else. It's text. I think it's text. On one side, it's text. On the other side, it's also text, formulates text. But I think trying to get back to Cameron's point, and let's work with Cameron and you too, Christopher. What would be the medium, if you want to say that medium, which is text-based, all right, is alive, metaphorically? Yeah. What would it take? What would need it to be? What kind of qualities would we want it to have to say that it's a living medium?
It has to oh, go ahead, Chris.
Oh, just off the top of my head, it feels like it would need a desire of its own. It would need the ability to give text without first receiving it for it to be alive for me. That's just what my brain goes to immediately.
Nice. Hang on to that.
So that one of the things I kept coming back to in the Kochia reading was he talked a lot about reason and rationality and plant life being embodied rationality, and I really had a problem with that. And this kind of is in the same, this feels like in the same space there, right? Does it need to have a desire? Does it need to have, so that's my question. Like, when you first asked that, what I thought was like transferring meaning is what gives it life, like having it mean something to someone else, right? Communication. But now that Christopher said that, I'm finding that more compelling.
Yeah, I see your point. Sorry, you were going to say? Go ahead. Yeah.
Yeah, well, this is another one of the things I struggled with from the Kochia reading, in addition to the plants are self-sufficient or something like that. But there was that whole part about reason being inherent to like the seed in that Kochia reading, which sounds similar to like this text finding inherent meaning in itself conversation. Does that make sense? Yeah, just like, yeah, go ahead, Christopher. I don't know if I'm explaining that right.
If you're not done, you can continue if you're not done.
Yeah, well, I struggled with the statement of like a seed or a plant having inherent reason in it, but it also does kind of make sense to me. Like a machine or like something inanimate does not like itself have like a predetermined form necessarily. Like we imbue form and reason into it, unlike a plant, which has some form and reason inherent to it. Yeah. Which this ties into the text conversation somehow.
This is opening a big can of, I shouldn't say worms, but a big can of something, big can of sunflower seeds or something, because simultaneously we're being thrown into some deep waters here in a good way. One is we'll talk about reason and rationality, to what extent that's dependent on language, like Japanese, English, Chinese, quote, natural language with the history, okay, behind it. And then another question would be like this question of substrate, like when I say stuff, we just slid from, sugar and light to language, without blinking, but that's a big shift, right? A big shift. And what's really interesting is in recent years, in the last, let's say 10, 15 years, there's been a big shift in thinking in different areas, like cultural studies, feminism, in thinking and political theory, turning back again toward from language-based studies. This is a bit of potted intellectual history, all right. Kind of like studies of how we think and how we act and how societies work, kind of filter through the lens of language, compared to linguistic structures, let's say. So there's a lot of very, very powerful work ranging from Derrida to Judith Butler, let's say, and more, and before that to Wittgenstein. Okay, so language, how does language work, and how do our technologies and societies work thanks to language? Okay, and even computer science, going back to the beginning of the 20th century, was kind of forming artificial languages that capture certain aspects of what we do with words, okay, making it mechanical so that computers can do that, okay, which is a lot smaller set than what humans do with language. That's one of the points I want to get through to this course, in this course. But in the last 10, not wait, and I should say and in the last 10, 15 years or so, there's been a lot of really interesting work and say, okay, but what about stuff? What about matter? But not returning it to physics, and not about going back to the only the kinds of matter that obey the regularities that physicists teach us in school. So whether it's political theory, cultural studies, post-colonialism, or feminist theory, contemporary feminist theory, there's a lot of interest in this kind of what people call new materialism. And I hate using these terms because it's a jargon term that actually erases all the fundamental differences in perspective that are kind of all banded together. So I hope we don't use that term, when we're actually trying to do some work with it, but it's a convenient term, okay? Materialism is a key thing. That's fine, which is the same thing reading some plants. So you're surfacing already, the big issues. This Kocha talks about rationality, and it strikes us as being strange, strikes me as being strange because I'm associating rationality with certain kind of logic with what people do, meaning something can be done in words, in language, in law, let's say, or mathematics, but not with plants. So it's a nice stretch exercise. Maybe we can go back to look at it and say, what the hell, in what sense could this word rationality make sense in this culture context? It's going to be different.
So while I was reading that, it's what I always do when I come across a word and like, this doesn't sit right here. I just go to the dictionary. What does this word actually mean? What are the different meanings that we've agreed upon, right? So I started with reason and reasoning, which is directly linked to logic and judgment and understanding and persuasion, justification. But then when I looked at rationality, that has to do with definitionally looking at the dictionary, a process of choice making that results in optimal utility. And it felt like there was something where where the meaning was in his usage of thinking about plant life, and literally, he used the space in which the act of reason coexists with the becoming of matter. That's on page 25 and at the end of page 25 and beginning of 26. And that makes sense to me if you think about a seed, right, as becoming. It's kind of like the promise of something to come.
Yes. I think that's really well put. Okay, so let's go with this a little bit more. Okay, where he talks about the flower, in that part at the end, that's at the end of several pages of work of development. Okay, so I think it is good to go back to 25 where Tanya was pointing to, and think about this whole process of enrichment of the earth that plants have done since about 3 billion years ago, actually. And that's really beautiful. The beginning of not just this book, but other books talking about plants. like if you look at like the books on fungi, who introduced that book, The Mushroom at the End of the World? Did somebody here mention Anand Singh's book? Anyway, yeah, okay, there you go. So I thinking about lichens and mushrooms and fungi, they have this role of also, like, more directly than not reducing, but what's the opposite of reducing? Enriching from stone to organic matter. Okay. So you can think of that as a kind of development at the material level, from inorganic to living form, non-living to living. And this is another aspect of this kind of new materials thinking that that's very, I think, very rich, which is if you want to go to a non-anthropocentric way of thinking. I can't help but meet non-anthropomorphic. We're human beings here, okay? So I'm always anthropomorphic, but we can try to be non-anthropocentric, which is to not think that we're the only interesting and important species in the planet, in the universe. That's so. So if you think about from that point of view, then think, okay, then what do these creatures, these living things do? Well, they were right on the interface between non-living and living material, okay, before the age of animals. And then think about, well, so if we want to take a non-anthropocentric notion of reason and rationality, how do we even do that? Well, we have to then think, well, what aspects of plants activity is not random, nor is it just mechanical, right? Mechanical would mean like, you put in the same initial conditions to get the same results out, and you just get it perfectly, identically. And that's not the case with you and me, right? I can start a conversation with you in 24 hours, maybe with the very same words, and we get different conversations, probably.
Isn't that fundamental to like dynamic systems though? Like because initial conditions in a dynamic system, certainly in what we're talking about, right? Very minute, immeasurable change in those initial conditions can result in what appears to be, even in a deterministic system, right? It looks like randomness. And I think that's really important in what we're saying right here, because it is all coded, and there are, you know what I mean? It is all code. There's codes being run, right? And but it looks like it's chaos. Yeah.
Yeah, this is going to get back to language models again. Okay, we'll get back to from this point. Okay, there are a couple of things here that are really important to flag, and we should come back to it. One that Tanya raised, and one is this aspect of complex dynamical systems. Okay, so just a little capsule about this. So this is where I wish we're in the same room to draw pictures on the board. I mean, I could. Yeah, I guess we could. Let's try this. Good. Okay, interlude. Systems. Can you see this? Yeah. Okay. Let's start with him. Can you see through? Okay, all right. So when we say system, right, we usually say parts. There are parts of the system, like heart, lungs, whatever, muscles. Or you can say have a factory, right, and different processes. So maybe there's metal coming in, it's maybe raw steel coming in, there's some forge that melts it, and there's some things that stamp it, etc. So you have stuff flowing through the network, and you have operators which are imposing changes on that stuff as it goes through the network. Okay, fine. And you can have various ways of describing this flow. But you can also have, in addition to this kind of flow of materials, some information. Like you might want to say, I want to inspect the quality of what's going through here. So I have some, right? So I have some camera, let's say, looking at the flow, and I do some pattern recognition and see if the parts are well formed. or I put a thermometer in it and measure the temperature. Right? In any case, you can have this notion of a feedback where the system, I'll say more another time, okay, to be more precise. But generally this idea that if the system is just flowing through, that's just a system. We want something that has some complexity to it. The system needs to be able to also inspect itself. So, question mark. Okay, needs to be inspect itself. If we want the system to be adaptive, then not only can you read out data, like about the state of the system, it can do something to itself. Suppose it's got a thermometer here in this pipe and says, oh, if it's too hot coming out, let's reduce the temperature of the furnace. So it goes back and reduces the temperature of the furnace. So now it's adaptive. Okay, that's it. So complex adaptive system. Now here's the thing. We can write even simpler than this. We can just write down some equations. We need to do on math. And we can write down a system which is fully what's called deterministic. And what that means is that it's like a bunch of equations. You plug in some initial data, you get some values out. And if you put in the same data, you get the same values out, okay? Mechanically. Okay, but this is what Tanya was referring to, all right? Even for very simple equations, if you make a small change, instead of 1.0000 forever, 1.00001, whatever, small difference, initial data, you can't predict. Or a better way to say it is that the variation in the output after a finite number of steps can be arbitrarily large. This kind of sensitivity to small perturbations is called chaos. Terrible name, terrible, terrible, terrible word. It's just hype, okay? What it should say is unpredictable. And there's some amazing theorems I hope I'll get to later on in this term, which will make us very cautious about things like economies and computer systems, right? They're not more fragile. But this is all, the system itself, though, is still deterministic. Okay, what that means is that it's got some precise mechanical ways to behave. Okay, so if you did put in exactly the same values, you do get the same output out. Now, life is more than that. Here's the thing. This is why we're reading about metabolism at the very get-go of this course. Is that, and there's some interesting recent work, again, last 10, 15 years, where people are looking at biology, looking at evolutionary biology, looking at how organisms behave, looking at how matter, like in material science, how in terms of the physical matter, like even properties of water itself. There are some what are called indeterminacies that is you can that are not computable. Okay, that is variations can happen. Okay, even when you know precisely what the initial data are, right? You fix it there. Variations can still happen that are undetermined, not determined. Now, this is just an abstract statement. What do you give this abstract statement, all right? So, what we can do is start with just looking at living things or living societies and see how there are these unpredicted novelties that occur. Think about the Ukraine war. That's one of my examples, Ukraine war. Okay. Or something maybe more controlled if you want, like parts in an airplane that crashes, right? And thinking about all the physical things that can go wrong, right? In addition to the deterministic things that can be unpredicted. So this is just a shorthand, right, for what I want to do when we go into infrastructure, all right? But on the plus side, and yet we have plants, we have trees, we have our own bodies. I mean, most until, for a long period of time, years and years, if you're lucky, I mean, if you're born, certain kinds of able forms, right, so to speak, there's a continuity of the organism, despite all those indeterminacies. So what is it about plants, or even us, or even a city like Rome that was burned multiple times, sacked multiple times in the course of its 2,400-year history? Okay, what is it about these living things that makes them robust, endure past events like that? All right. Okay, last thing today. I know we're taking a lot of time with this stuff. What are some other Kocha? Let's go to Kocha. Okay, what were some other features of plants that were really different between plants and animals that he starts with? He's not the only one. I'm looking here. Besides the metabolic stuff, there's more obvious ones. Right, here we go.
This wasn't in I don't think it was in the book, but something that came to mind for me was comparing plants. The issue of trust, essentially. As humans, we kind of are inherently distrustful, and we probably don't even know that we're being distrustful. That's why you have a gate, you have an alarm system, it's just built into the infrastructure. There are expressions of sometimes security, but then essentially they are results of a lack of trust. So it just made me think about if this may seem nonsensical, but like, what is trust to plants? Because they are just being, and how can we, if possible, extrapolate their existence to our, societies and infrastructures as to trust. The mango tree is the mango tree. It doesn't have a fence. Maybe some plants have protective systems, but yeah, I don't, just the difference between a human system and like a plant system, that
This thing about trust. Oh wow. People talk about money systems as being like one of the advantages of the cryptocurrency, like Bitcoin, that was invented, right, not too long ago, a couple of decades, was that it works in what's called a trustless environment. Instead of, let's say, like you pick out the old-fashioned paper money, United States paper money said, at least I think it says, "In God we trust," right? And then becomes basically based on faith in the federal government, United States federal government, being to pay its debts, et cetera, et cetera. So it's based on trust in something more than the individual actors in the economy. Maybe is that the kind of trust? Is that a different kind of trust, Nikki, than what you're talking about? A social trust?
Yeah, just different expressions of trust.
Yeah.
So what I was thinking about is essentially how plants support each other in their being. It does not seem, again, from outside observation, like they're antagonistic towards each other. The way we have to weave in systems that spot and crack down on these antagonisms towards us as humans. So it's like you just mentioned, Bitcoin, which is a response to yeah.
So, okay, infrastructures, remember we said that beginning, one of the things that makes a system an infrastructure is that's invisible, meaning we don't have to think about it working, we just use it, okay, until it breaks. Hopefully it doesn't break very often. But there's that kind of trust, there's kind of robustness, reliability, okay? And then there's this kind of other kind of trust, like social trust, like what I just said, faith in the economic system that for this backing this currency, etc. And then here in page 13 of Kocha, he talks about something maybe different, a little bit different. It's it said that plants are indifferent. He uses the word indifferent toward the human world. Um, uh, and also, I should add right now, also plants are, from Aristotle onward, were considered as inferior to animals because they don't move, they don't locomote, okay? When in fact they do grow. From the botany book, they grow and grow and grow, okay? They have a very rich metabolic life. But right away, Kocha says, yes, they don't grow, but they have an intimate place in the world because they're mostly in interface with the ambient. If you look at the roots and the leaves, plants have a lot more surface to body interior ratio than most animals, okay? Because they have this incredible porousness and like a metabolic porousness with the environment, much more. And that's why I highlighted this. They have a, what do you call it, complete exposure to their environment. So they're actually more placed than we are. They're much more, the kind of distinction between inside, outside, it's not so, not anywhere strong. It's a lot more porous than my sense of inside, outside, inside me, outside me. So it's not really indifferent in that sense, the basic sense of porousness to this environment. Okay, so it's something worth thinking about. So when say something, a plant, something is indifferent, what does it mean? You know, indifferent at what scale, in what way? You know, porous, not porous to what? I'm sorry, this is just the beginning, a teaser. You know, it's a lot more to it. All right. At least I hope this encourages you to go back and look at the plant stuff. All right, should see. And I hope we have a chance to also think a little bit about, you know, how to get some juice out of this when we go back to assess infrastructures. All right. Any last comments to share? Okay.
I think I'm convinced now about the rationality embodied by plants.
Well,
I changed my mind about that now.
Well, put into discussion, and then so
Yeah.
we can all look at that. All right. And we never quite got back to LLM, so somebody else can remind us that is kind of a loose thread. Okay. All right. Take care, guys. See you. Bye-bye.